The air in the workshop was thick with the scent of oiled brass, wood polish, and time. It was a quiet place, tucked behind a narrow street in a part of town that had forgotten how to be loud. People passed by its dust-speckled windows every day without glancing inside, as though their eyes had learned long ago that some door should remain unnoticed. Inside, the clockmaker worked. He was old. How old? No one could say for certain, and his hands moved with a rhythm no longer bound by time, as if his fingers themselves were wound with invisible gears. The clocks around him, hundreds of them, ticked in uneven unison, some tall and majestic, others small and delicate, each one handcrafted, each one alive in its own peculiar way. The tick-tocking sound filled the space like a gentle heartbeat, echoing off shelves lined with gears and springs. He never opened the shop to customers. Not really. Sometimes, a stranger might wander in, bell above the door barely making a sound, and he would look up, narrow eyes peering through lenses stacked thick on his nose. If he felt something in them, a kind of silence, perhaps, or sorrow, they would be allowed to stay a while. Maybe he would fix their watch. Maybe he wouldn't. No one ever complained. No one ever asked why his clocks had no prices, or why they couldn't buy one even if they begged. The townspeople called him Mr. Vane. It wasn't his real name, but it was the one that had stuck. Children whispered tales about him. How he once built a clock so perfect it could rewind a whole day. How a man who came looking for a lost hour never returned. How Mr. Vane could hear the ticking of your heart if you stood too close. Of course, none of these stories were true. And all of them were. The workshop was more than a place. It was a sanctuary, a cathedral of moments, where time bowed its head in reverence. There were clocks that rang only when someone lied, clocks that ticked backward when someone grieved, clocks that slowed down when lovers kissed beneath them. He didn't build them that way. They simply turned out like that, as though the wood, the metal, the winding tension of spring and pendulum all knew more than he did. And then there was the secret. It was buried beneath the floorboards, locked behind a brass trapdoor no one had ever seen open. Not even Mr. Vane. He had built the trapdoor 50 years ago. Or maybe it was yesterday. He had forgotten. All he knew was that the trapdoor was not to be touched until the time came. He had carved a warning on the underside of a broken wall clock, one he never repaired. When the 13th hour rings, the secret will stir. He never told anyone what the 13th hour meant. Every morning, just before dawn, he would sit at his workbench and wind a small, silver pocket watch. It looked ordinary, plain face, thin black hands, no numbers. But he never let it out of his sight. Sometimes he whispered to it. Sometimes he just stared, as if waiting for it to say something. That pocket watch never ticked. Not once. Years passed, decades, and Mr. Vane grew no older. People forgot to question him. The world around the shop changed. Buildings were torn down, others built, the sky painted with steel and glass. But the shop remained, unchanged, untouched. Then one evening, just as the sky burned orange with a setting sun, a girl entered the workshop. She was small, no older than 15, with ash-colored eyes and an air of quiet that unsettled the dust. She didn't knock. The bell above the door made no sound. Mr. Vane looked up. He squinted. Then he stood. She walked to the center of the room, where the clocks murmured around her, and held out a broken wristwatch. The glass was shattered, the hands twisted into a spiral. "Can you fix it?" she asked. He took it gently, turned it over, inspected the back, frowned. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "It was my father's," she said. He disappeared. Mr. Vane's hand stiffened. He turned the watch face toward the candlelight, and beneath the grime and crackling dust he saw it. A tiny engraving, almost imperceptible. 13:01. He had seen that engraving once before. Long ago. Or maybe it hadn't happened yet. He handed the watch back. "I can't fix this," he said softly. The girl didn't argue. She only nodded and turned to leave. "Wait," he said. "What was your father's name?" "Elias," she said. "Elias Vane." The clocks all stopped. Every single one. Silence fell like snow. Mr. Vane sat down slowly. His breath came shallow. The pocket watch on the bench began to tremble. "I don't have a son," he whispered. The girl stood very still. "Not yet," she said. She placed the broken watch beside the silver one. For the first time in 100 years, or maybe a single moment, the silver pocket watch ticked. Once, the workshop shuddered. The trapdoor clicked. The girl walked to the corner of the room where the floor seemed older, darker, dust untouched. She knelt and ran her fingers along the boards until she found the seams of brass. The trapdoor opened without resistance. Inside was nothing but a staircase, spiraling down into a velvet dark. She didn't wait. She descended. Mr. Vane stood, the air thick with the scent of burning oil and something colder. He reached for the pocket watch. Its hands now pointed not to any time he recognized, but to symbols, curved, ancient, alive. He closed his eyes. The ticking grew louder. One by one, the clocks began to tick again. But their rhythm was different, out of sync, unfamiliar. The room seemed to bend. The walls pulsed. Time, in that place, forgot how to behave. It curled around itself, stretched, snapped, and settled into a shape that couldn't be named. He sat back at the bench, waited. An hour passed, or a century, and then the trapdoor opened again. The girl returned, but she was not the same. Her eyes had no whites now, just endless reflections, like watch faces turned inward. Her hands glowed faintly, her skin threaded with silver lines like clockwork veins. In her palm was a key that ticked. She walked slowly to the workbench and placed the key beside the pocket watch. "You wound the first hour," she said. "Now it begins." "What begins?" Mr. Vane asked, though he knew. "The 13th cycle," she replied. "The hour outside hours. The moment between endings." The clocks rang. All of them. Together. 13 chimes. Mr. Vane did not move. Somewhere beneath the floor, gears began to turn. The workshop shook. And outside, the sky forgot the sun. Birds stopped flying midair, held by unseen hands. People froze mid-step, mid-sentence. Time paused, waiting. And then the secret began to awaken. The keys dissolved in his hands, first into light, then into sound. That sound echoed through the chamber and beyond, like 1,000 clocks shattering in perfect harmony. Mr. Vane fell to his knees, hands empty, heart full of something he couldn't name. The source had accepted the turn, but it had not decided. Above him, the great gears of the universe rotated once, then halted. Across every world, in every age, all clocks stopped. The illusion was broken. People stared at frozen watches, unblinking sundials, blank digital displays. The birds in the sky stopped flapping their wings. Cars halted mid-road. Lovers paused mid-kiss. Rain froze in midair. And the source waited. It wanted a choice. Not just action, but intent. Mr. Vane stood slowly. His joints no longer ached. His body was not his own, and yet it was more him than ever. The years had burned away like fog, leaving something pure behind. Not a man, not a god, a will, a witness. He looked up. The origin pulsed above him, an orb of white flame wrapped in filaments of time. Inside, he saw everything. The child he once was, taking apart his first clock, the night he stayed awake to build one that ticked to his heartbeat, the first moment he whispered, "What if time isn't real?" It had begun with curiosity. It had ended with silence. And now he had one final decision. He extended his hand toward the source. It pulsed once, then split open. Outpoured timelines like rivers, braided, coiling, infinite. Each one showed a different outcome, a different reality. He could step into any of them. He could become someone else. Undo all this. Walk away. But something deeper called. From within the timelines emerged figures, half-seen shapes that flickered like candlelight behind stained glass. They were the keepers, his creations, his consequences. The first one stepped forward, a tall woman with a crown of silver feathers and eyes like collapsing stars. "You made me to protect the 9th spiral," she said. I obeyed. The next came, his body covered in runes that moved like living ink. "You sent me to rewrite the errors of the forgotten century," he said. I failed. Another followed, a child, no older than 10, whose voice echoed with ancient sorrow. "I was born in the uncounted hour. I was never meant to age. I waited for you." One by one they came. Dozens. Hundreds. Each shaped by his hands, his mind, his fear of entropy. Each one fractured in their own way. The weight of their existence settled over him like chains. You called yourselves the keepers, he said. No, said the first. You named us that. We called ourselves what we became. Asterisk, asterisk, the shards. Asterisk, asterisk. He turned away from them, back to the source. If I restore the symmetry, you'll all be erased. The child nodded. But so will the suffering. And if I keep things as they are, you prolong the pain, but preserve the choice. Mr. Vane closed his eyes. He could hear the ticking again, but it came from within. His heartbeat, shaped like seconds. His breath, like minutes. His thoughts, like hours. Time is not real, he whispered. But we made it real to survive. The shard stood silent. One stepped forward, a woman with eyes made of turning dials. What do you choose, Maker? He reached forward and placed his hand on the source. The timelines wrapped around his fingers like threads of silk, and he began to weave. He did not destroy time. He did not preserve it. He rewrote it. The threads danced under his hands, weaving a new symmetry, not perfect but kind, not ordered but free, a reality where time no longer ruled, but served, where hours were not prisons but pathways. In this new loom, he placed a truth that every second belongs not to clocks, but to people. The source glowed brighter. The chamber filled with warmth. The keepers began to dissolve, but this time they smiled. Not vanishing, becoming. Each one folded into the tapestry of the new time. The child became the laughter of a newborn in a distant world. The rune-covered man became the ink in a poet's quill. The silver-crowned woman became the wind that moves the hands of forgotten clocks. They did not die. They became moments. And Mr. Vane, he became silence. When the workshop reappeared, it stood alone at the end of time. Dustless. Perfect. Inside it, the clocks had no hands. The pendulums were still. But they did not feel dead. They felt complete. The shop door opened. No bell rang. A young man entered. Tall. Curious. Eyes bright with questions. He looked around. Brows furrowed. Mouth slightly open. Hello. He called. Is anyone here? No answer. He stepped further in. On the workbench sat a single item, a plain silver pocket watch. He picked it up. It ticked once in his palm. The back was engraved. Your time is yours now. And suddenly he smiled. Not because he understood, but because he didn't have to. He pocketed the watch, turned around, and stepped back into the world. As he walked through the door, the clocks behind him began to tick. Not in unison, not in order, but in rhythm with him. He did not know the name, Mr. Vane. But as he walked into the sunlight, a faint whisper echoed behind him, one last time. Don't be late. And somewhere, far beneath the world, the source slept again. Not locked, not waiting, just breathing, ready for the next question. The key was small, yet impossibly intricate, etched with symbols no language had ever known and shaped like a spiral that folded into itself endlessly, like time caught in a mirror maze. It clicked gently against the silver watch, which now pulsed softly, like a heartbeat beneath polished glass. Mr. Vane stared at the key, then at the girl. No, not a girl anymore. Something else. Something stitched from time itself. Her voice was steady, layered with echoes, as if others were speaking with her through her. You built the lock, Elias. Now you must turn the key. My name is not Elias, the clockmaker whispered, though even as he said it, the name settled inside his chest like a gear slipping into place. It is. It always was. But time fractured. You forgot. He picked up the key, its metal surprisingly warm. The moment his fingers closed around it, visions bloomed behind his eyes, fractured dreams, fragments of impossible events, faces he had never seen but somehow loved. A woman with hair like falling autumn, laughing beside a sundial. A boy with one green eye and one silver one, playing with wooden gears in the light of a clock tower. A war made of hours. A city that lived between seconds. A betrayal. He staggered back, clutching the key, heart racing out of rhythm. The silver watch throbbed in response. All the clocks in the room tilted toward him, like sunflowers toward light. Why now? He asked. Why did it begin now? Because the loop is fraying, said the girl. Time can no longer sustain the lie. You hit it well, but all lies have weight. And now, the center cannot hold. The walls of the workshop shimmered. A hairline crack split the ceiling, but it bled no dust, only light, blue and trembling. Mr. Vane turned slowly toward the trapdoor. The staircase below breathed. Not air, not mist, something denser. You said it begins, he said. What exactly begins? The girl stepped forward, placing a pale hand over the silver watch. It stopped pulsing. The room fell into deep silence again, the kind that suffocates thought. The clockwork vault opens, she said. The source is waking, and the keepers are stirring. He blinked. The keepers? You built them, Elias. Fragments of yourself, bound to timelines you never meant to fracture. They've waited, in different centuries, different outcomes, but this is the one that returns them all to the origin. The trapdoor creaked wider. The staircase shifted subtly. It now reached down forever. Mr. Vane walked to the edge and looked in. There was no end, no floor, only ticking. Steady, constant ticking, like a great heart beneath the world. He clutched the key tighter. I buried it for a reason. You buried it because you feared it, said the girl. And fear is a kind of truth. He turned back to her. And what are you? I'm your echo. The last sound of your first mistake. The room collapsed inward. Not physically. Its geometry folded instead. Walls melting into corners that shouldn't exist, clocks spinning out of rhythm. Some ticked backwards. Others ticked forward into centuries that hadn't happened yet. One began to sing a lullaby in an extinct language. Mr. Vane fell to his knees, clutching his skull as time pushed through his mind. Names, numbers, worlds, infinite calendars. The moment before the Big Bang. The final tick before heat death. All of it swirled. Anchor me, he gasped. Anchor me before I break. The girl knelt beside him and pressed 2 fingers to his temple. A hum filled the room, low and resonant. The clocks calmed. His breath evened. You built the anchor too, she said. But you hid it inside the one thing you couldn't control, your memory. He opened his eyes, which now shimmered like silver dials. I remember, he said. Then you know what must be done. I must descend. She nodded. With trembling hands, he lowered the key toward the silver pocket watch. It slid into an invisible seam with no resistance. As it turned, the ticking stopped completely, and then reversed. The staircase flared with light. A slow, grinding rumble began beneath the earth. The walls of the workshop unfolded, no longer wood and nail, but vast tapestries of events, a map of every birth, every death, every second ever lived or imagined. He stepped down, and the light swallowed him. Each step into the vault aged him and unaged him. His bones turned to ash, then reformed to steel. His breath became wind, then silence, then song. The girl followed, her feet never touching the stairs. Around them, the spiral of time revealed its shape, neither line nor circle but something alive, writhing, always becoming. They passed through the era of smoke, where forgotten kings bartered days for power. They crossed the frozen hour, where nothing moved but thought. They walked the corridor of unborn clocks, machines never made, each weeping its lost potential. At last, they reached the chamber of the origin. It was not large, a room with no ceiling and no floor, just a suspended moment, held inside a glass sphere. In its center was a second key, this one forged not from brass or gold, but from pure consequence. It's still here, Mr. Vane whispered. After all this time. Because you chose to forget it, the girl said. But forgetting doesn't undo what's been done. He walked toward it. The key floated, untouched by gravity, humming with potential. With every step, pieces of himself fell away, fears, regrets, memories not his own. When he reached the key, he was no longer the clockmaker. He was time, and time was afraid. The key responded to his presence. It spun once, then again, faster. The girl, his echo, began to fade. I was never meant to last, she said. Only to lead you here. He turned to her. Will I remember you? No, she said. But I'll remember you. And then she vanished, as all echoes must. Alone now, Mr. Vane reached into the void and grasped the final key. At once, the room folded into a singular moment. The first tick. He stood at the beginning of everything. The moment time was born. The chaos before the calendar. He could see the shape of history stretching forward, the rise of civilizations, the heartbreaks of ordinary people, the whisper of every hour yet to pass. He also saw the flaw, the fracture he had caused by building the first impossible clock. By believing time could be measured, caged, owned. That first arrogance had splintered reality into spirals. Now, holding both keys, he knew what he had to do. He had to choose, unlock the source and restore all fractured timelines, knowing it would mean the end of identity, self, memory. Or lock it forever, preserving the illusion of time, but dooming every echo to repeat endlessly. Neither was mercy. He stepped to the edge of the origin. He raised both keys, and he began to turn one. The world trembled. The first clock began to tick. Somewhere, in a city of chrome and sky, a child looked up at a sundial that cast no shadow. In another world, a soldier watched the second hand of his wristwatch stop, then begin counting downward. A baby was born in a hospital where all the clocks ran in reverse. An old woman, dying in her bed, smiled as the hourglass beside her unspilled. Mr. Vane stood at the center of it all, and for the first time in eternity, wept. The vault responded. The walls crumbled into possibilities. The sky of time shattered, and the future held its breath. Outside the workshop, the world was quieter than before, not by silence, but by design. Time no longer pushed people forward, it walked beside them. The young man, who had unknowingly carried the last ember of the Clockmaker's story, stepped into the street as the sun hovered in a sky that didn't rush to set. He didn't have a destination. The silver watch ticked softly in his coat pocket, its presence more calming than mysterious. Every few steps, he'd feel it pulse slightly, like it was nudging him, guiding him. Not to a place, but to a purpose. The city around him was strange, familiar in shape, yet filled with a feeling he couldn't explain. People moved slower, not sluggishly, but deliberately, like dancers in a rhythm only they could hear. Time had changed here. You could see it in the way children lingered in laughter, in how an old man took 5 whole minutes to sip a cup of tea with reverence, or how 2 strangers stood in silent gaze on a train platform long after the train had come and gone. No one checked their watches. No one hurried. No one was late, because nothing started until it was meant to. And yet, behind the peace, a subtle current stirred. The young man stopped near a fountain, its water rising and falling not in arcs, but in slow-motion spirals, like it too had been affected by whatever had changed. A woman nearby hummed a melody. It sounded ancient, but he couldn't place it. He turned to her. "Excuse me, do you know this place?" She smiled without looking at him. "It knows you." He blinked. "What does that mean?" "You came from the Clockmaker's shop, didn't you?" His hand instinctively moved toward his coat pocket. "Yes. How did you know?" "Because I did too," she said softly, standing now. She was older than him, with gray streaks in her hair, eyes lined with the weight of many lived moments. "Years ago. Or maybe it was tomorrow. Hard to tell these days." He stepped closer. "Who are you?" She reached into her coat and pulled out something wrapped in silk. When she unwrapped it, he saw a brass timepiece shaped like a teardrop, with no hands, only a single glowing dot that moved around its rim. "I used to be a historian," she said. "Now I collect lost hours." He frowned. "Lost hours?" She nodded. "Moments that were erased. Sacrificed. Forgotten. They're still here, somewhere. You can hear them if you listen closely. They echo." He remembered the girl in the workshop, the echo. "Did you ever meet someone named?" But she shook her head before he finished. "No names. Not anymore. Too heavy. But I know what you're looking for. You're feeling it already, aren't you? The pull." He nodded slowly. "Then you'll find her." Before he could ask more, she turned and walked away, melting into the market crowd like a figure fading from a dream. The young man was left with the tick of a silver watch, and a growing feeling that something important was calling him forward. He wandered deeper into the city, past cafes that served time-stamped dreams and alleys where people left notes for versions of themselves they hadn't met yet. There were paintings that changed depending on who viewed them, and statues that aged backward when touched. This was a world reimagined, not destroyed. A timeline rewritten, not erased. At the center of the city stood a clock tower, or what used to be one. Now it was hollow, its gears floating in midair, rotating slowly around a luminous core that pulsed like a heartbeat. People gathered near it in silence, not to tell time, but to remember something none of them could name. Some prayed, others simply sat and stared. The young man approached the structure. As he stood beneath the floating gears, the silver watch in his pocket clicked louder. When he held it out, it glowed. A whisper followed. "Climb." There were no stairs, but a narrow beam of light descended from the top, and without knowing how, he stepped into it. He rose, not with effort, but with surrender. The air shimmered as he passed through layers of forgotten seconds and overlooked details. He saw moments hanging like lanterns in space, a child skipping a stone across water, a woman tearing a love letter, a soldier lowering his weapon. These were not grand events, but they mattered. At the top, he emerged into a circular chamber filled with suspended clocks, each gently rotating. In the center stood a figure, her back turned, her hair long and dark, laced with streaks of silver. He knew, without knowing why, that this was her. The Echo. She turned as he approached, and her eyes held galaxies. She looked older now, more defined. The chaotic shimmer of time that once clung to her had settled. She was not just a reflection anymore. She was real. "You came," she said softly. "I didn't know I was supposed to. You weren't. But the moment needed you." She gestured to the silver watch. "That's the last one. The last lie." He looked at it. What lie? That time could be owned. The watch pulsed. "If it's a lie," he asked, "why did the clockmaker make it?" Outside the workshop, the world was quieter than before, not by silence, but by design. Time no longer pushed people forward, it walked beside them. The young man, who had unknowingly carried the last ember of the clockmaker's story, stepped into the street as the sun hovered in a sky that didn't rush to set. He didn't have a destination. The silver watch ticked softly in his coat pocket, its presence more calming than mysterious. Every few steps, he'd feel it pulse slightly, like it was nudging him, guiding him. Not to a place, but to a purpose. The city around him was strange, familiar in shape, yet filled with a feeling he couldn't explain. People moved slower, not sluggishly, but deliberately, like dancers in a rhythm only they could hear. Time had changed here. You could see it in the way children lingered in laughter, in how an old man took 5 whole minutes to sip a cup of tea with reverence, or how 2 strangers stood in silent gaze on a train platform long after the train had come and gone. No one checked their watches. No one hurried. No one was late, because nothing started until it was meant to. And yet, behind the peace, a subtle current stirred. The young man stopped near a fountain, its water rising and falling not in arcs, but in slow-motion spirals, like it too had been affected by whatever had changed. A woman nearby hummed a melody. It sounded ancient, but he couldn't place it. He turned to her. "Excuse me, do you know this place?" She smiled without looking at him. "It knows you." He blinked. "What does that mean?" "You came from the clockmaker's shop, didn't you?" His hand instinctively moved toward his coat pocket. "Yes." "How did you know?" "Because I did too," she said softly, standing now. She was older than him, with gray streaks in her hair, eyes lined with the weight of many lived moments. "Years ago. Or maybe it was tomorrow. Hard to tell these days." He stepped closer. "Who are you?" She reached into her coat and pulled out something wrapped in silk. When she unwrapped it, he saw a brass timepiece shaped like a teardrop, with no hands, only a single glowing that moved around its rim. "I used to be a historian," she said. "Now I collect lost hours." He frowned. "Lost hours?" She nodded. "Moments that were erased. Sacrificed. Forgotten. They're still here, somewhere. You can hear them if you listen closely. They echo." He remembered the girl in the workshop, the Echo. "Did you ever meet someone named?" But she shook her head before he finished. "No names. Not anymore. Too heavy. But I know what you're looking for. You're feeling it already, aren't you? The pull." He nodded slowly. "Then you'll find her." Before he could ask more, she turned and walked away, melting into the market crowd like a figure fading from a dream. The young man was left with the tick of the silver watch, and a growing feeling that something important was calling him forward. He wandered deeper into the city, past cafes that served time-stamped dreams and alleys where people left notes for versions of themselves they hadn't met yet. There were paintings that changed depending on who viewed them, and statues that aged backward when touched. This was a world reimagined, not destroyed. A timeline rewritten, not erased. At the center of the city stood a clock tower, or what used to be one. Now it was hollow, its gears floating in midair, rotating slowly around a luminous core that pulsed like a heartbeat. People gathered near it in silence, not to tell time, but to remember something none of them could name. Some prayed, others simply sat and stared. The young man approached the structure. As he stood beneath the floating gears, the silver watch in his pocket clicked louder. When he held it out, it glowed. A whisper followed. "Climb!" There were no stairs, but a narrow beam of light descended from the top, and without knowing how, he stepped into it. He rose, not with effort, but with surrender. The air shimmered as he passed through layers of forgotten seconds and overlooked details. He saw moments hanging like lanterns in space, a child skipping a stone across water, a woman tearing a love letter, a soldier lowering his weapon. These were not grand events, but they mattered. At the top, he emerged into a circular chamber filled with suspended clocks, each gently rotating. In the center stood a figure, her back turned, her hair long and dark, laced with streaks of silver. He knew, without knowing why, that this was her. The Echo. She turned as he approached, and her eyes held galaxies. She looked older now, more defined. The chaotic shimmer of time that once clung to her had settled. She was not just a reflection anymore. She was real. "You came," she said softly. "I didn't know I was supposed to. You weren't. But the moment needed you." She gestured to the silver watch. "That's the last one. The last lie." He looked at it. What lie? That time could be owned. The watch pulsed. "If it's a lie," he asked, "why did the clockmaker make it?" Because he was afraid of forgetting. So he built memories into machines, seconds into cages. He thought order would protect meaning. She stepped closer, but it didn't. He remembered the trapdoor, the source, the keepers. He remembered becoming silence. "I've seen something." Inside the watch. Images. Like shadows behind glass. She nodded. "They're not shadows. They're seeds. Each tick holds a choice. You've been growing one." He held the watch tightly. "What do I do with it?" "You free it." She reached out and pressed 2 fingers against the watch. It glowed, so brightly it seemed to hum. Then, like a blossom opening, the watch cracked. Out poured light. Memories. Possibilities. They flooded the room. Thousands of faces, thousands of timelines. Some beautiful, some terrifying, but all real, all human. When the light faded, the watch was gone. And so was the Echo. He was alone in the tower, but something remained. A soft humming in the floor beneath his feet. He looked down. The floating gears spun faster now, as if readying for something. Then the tower shook. The air vibrated. And above him, a new clock began to form. It wasn't like the old ones. It had no hands, no numbers, just a mirror. In it, he saw himself, and behind him thousands of others, each with their own watches, each with their own choices. Then, without warning, the mirror shattered, and the shards floated around him, turning into birds made of glass and light. They scattered out of the tower, into the sky, across the world. Everywhere they flew, clocks stopped ticking. Not because time had ended, but because it was no longer needed. People didn't panic. They felt it. A lightness. A clarity. They looked at each other not with urgency, but with understanding. The past was not erased. The future was not written. There was only now, and now was finally enough. They flooded the room. Thousands of faces, thousands of timelines. Some beautiful, some terrifying, but all real, all human. When the light faded, the watch was gone. And so was the Echo. He was alone in the tower, but something remained. A soft humming in the floor beneath his feet. He looked down. The floating gears spun faster now, as if readying for something. Then the tower shook. The air vibrated. And above him, a new clock began to form. It wasn't like the old ones. It had no hands, no numbers, just a mirror. In it, he saw himself, and behind him thousands of others, each with their own watches, each with their own choices. Then, without warning, the mirror shattered, and the shards floated around him, turning into birds made of glass and light. They scattered out of the tower, into the sky, across the world. Everywhere they flew, clocks stopped ticking. Not because time had ended, but because it was no longer needed. People didn't panic. They felt it. A lightness. A clarity. They looked at each other not with urgency, but with understanding. The past was not erased. The future was not written. There was only now, and now was finally enough. The young man descended the tower. The beam of light faded behind him. As his feet touched the ground, a woman ran up to him, laughing. "Did you see it?" she asked, breathless. "I saw something," he said, smiling. "But I think we all will." Around them, the city began to hum, not with noise, but with living time. Not scheduled, but spontaneous. A child painted on a wall. A baker handed out bread for free. A couple planted a tree where a digital billboard once stood. Somewhere, far from the city, an old man with no memory of who he had once been sat beside a river. He watched the water ripple, sunlight catching on its surface like liquid glass. A bird, one made of mirror and light, landed on his shoulder. It chirped once. He smiled, and for the first time in countless years, he cried without knowing why. He did not remember clocks, but he remembered love, and that was enough. Time, having been rewritten, no longer demanded obedience. It offered a gift instead, presence. And though the clocks had stopped, the people had just begun. The days that followed felt less like a continuation of time and more like its rediscovery. People slowly unlearned the urgency they'd once clung to. No longer did they measure their lives in hours or deadlines, but in experiences, each moment treated as sacred, unrushed, unrepeatable. The sky still changed its color. The moon still rose. But the day had no name, and the night brought no fear of what tomorrow might demand. In this new world, there were those who remembered fragments of how things had been. They were scattered across villages and cities, mountains and oceans, speaking of clocks and gears, of the old man who had disappeared when the sky forgot to tick. Some spoke of him as a god, others as a ghost, but none with certainty. He was never seen again, but his influence remained. The young man, now referred to by many as the Unwinder, lived a quiet life near the sea. He had built a modest home from stone and driftwood, where the waves whispered stories he couldn't quite understand, though they always left him at peace. He kept no clocks in his home, only memories, carved into wood, painted onto walls, buried in the folds of laughter with those who visited him. He did not claim to be special. He didn't try to explain what he had seen in the tower, or how the silver watch had vanished into light. But when children asked him what time was, he would smile gently and say, "It's whatever you make of it." And they believed him. One morning, a girl appeared at his doorstep. She couldn't have been more than 8 or 9, with hair the color of honey and eyes too knowing for her age. She wore a simple robe and carried nothing but a small leather pouch. The man looked at her and knew. He gestured her inside without asking a single question. They sat together as the wind blew through the open window. She placed the pouch on the table and opened it slowly. Inside was a shard of mirrored glass, still glowing faintly from the clock tower. "I found this," she said, "in the woods, where no birds sing." He studied it. The light inside shimmered, changing colors with her breath. "It's a memory," he said, "but not just one. It's many." She nodded. "Can I see them?" He hesitated. "You might not be the same after." Her response was simple. "I don't want to be the same." He gently placed the shard against her palm. It dissolved like water. And she saw. She saw the world before. Cities built on seconds. Love weighed against minutes. Joy taxed by the tyranny of time. She saw lives shortened not by death, but by the rush to live before it was too late. She saw herself, in a version that never had time to stop and breathe. And then she saw the change. The unraveling. The rebirth. When her vision cleared, tears were running down her cheeks. But she wasn't sad. She was opened, like a door that had always been locked. "Can I carry them?" she asked softly. He looked out the window. The sky was pink now, and the sea glowed as if reflecting stars not yet born. "If you do," he said, "you'll never settle. You'll move from place to place. The stories will call to you." She smiled. "Good." He handed her a walking stick. Not special, just sturdy. and she left without another word. It wouldn't be the last time someone came. Over the years, more would arrive. Wanderers, seekers, dreamers who had found fragments of time and wanted to understand them. They spoke different languages, came from distant lands, but all carried that same soft glow, light that only appeared after one had glimpsed the truth. They called themselves the Winders. They weren't a cult, or a religion, or even a group. Just people who had remembered what most had forgotten. That time is not a master but a mirror. Some Winders settled in villages and created gardens that bloomed by emotion rather than season. Others traveled to the coldest mountains, where they carved memories into stone. A few took boats across the sea to lands untouched by the change, carrying the seed of the new rhythm with them. But one Winder, a woman with golden eyes and a voice that sounded like rain on rooftops, did something different. She built a library, not of books, but of moments. She found a grove where the trees leaned inward, creating a dome of leaves that filtered starlight during the day and glowed with fireflies at night. There, she whispered memories into jars, first her own, then those offered by others. Heartbeats captured in glass, not to trap them, but to preserve their shape. She called the place the library between. There were no shelves. The jars floated mid-air, drifting slowly, rearranging themselves when new moments were added. You didn't browse them. You didn't read them. You simply stood in silence, opened one, and felt. Sometimes you'd weep. Sometimes you'd laugh. Sometimes you'd learn something you didn't know you'd forgotten. The library between became known only by word of mouth, spoken from lips to ear, heart to hand. There were no maps. You found it when you were ready, or when it needed you. It was said that one of the jars contained Mr. Vane's last moment. Not his death, because no one believed he died, but the last time he was seen by another. A child had wandered into the forest where time bends. She had been lost for days, maybe weeks, when a strange old man offered her a seat beside a fire that crackled without wood. They didn't talk. They just watched the sky. At dawn, he handed her a wooden gear the size of her palm. "Take this," he said. "If the world ever starts ticking again, remind it how to breathe." Then he was gone. The gear now sits in the library between, suspended beside his moment. It pulses like a slow drumbeat. People who feel it often leave changed. They return to their lives with slower steps, deeper breaths, and eyes that look not just ahead, but around. Far across the ocean, in a city that never knew clocks, a monument was built. It had no plaques, no names, just a large circle made of glass, standing upright like a portal. People stood before it and saw not their reflection, but possibility, who they could become if they stopped chasing time and started walking with it. Children liked to run through it, giggling. Lovers whispered into it, hoping their words would echo into the future. Artists sat before it, sketching what they saw on the other side. Some saw themselves old, wise, surrounded by family. Others saw themselves alone but content, living in a small cabin in the mountains. A few saw nothing at all, and smiled, knowing they had room to dream. Every now and then, a bird made of mirror would perch atop the circle. Its feathers shimmered with unread memories. People believed it carried the remnants of the old clock tower. When it flew away, they followed it for as long as their legs or hearts allowed. It never returned to the same place twice, but it always landed where it was needed. Back in the quiet coastal village, the young man, older now, with streaks of white in his beard, watched the sea with gentle eyes. He sat on the same porch every evening, surrounded by flowers that bloomed to the sound of laughter. He didn't miss the old world. He didn't long for the ticking. But sometimes, just before sleep, he heard it again, the rhythm of seconds, the mechanical hum of a pendulum, the whisper of a gear turning. Not as a haunting, but as a farewell, as if time itself had forgiven him, and was grateful to be free. The Clockmaker's secret. This brings the story to its resolution while maintaining its philosophical depth and mysterious tone. The sun had not risen that day, not in the ordinary sense. Across the worlds, some ancient, some yet unborn, the light came from within. The source was no longer a secret kept in shadow or silence, but a melody woven through the fabric of existence. The rewriting had begun gently, like a dream retold by the stars. The young man who had entered Mr. Vane's workshop walked with a quiet kind of purpose. He did not remember stepping through time, nor why his heartbeat seemed to match the rhythm of unknown gears. Yet the pocket watch in his coat ticked with a calm certainty, and that was enough for now. He passed through towns where the clocks had changed shape. They no longer counted down lives. Instead, they bloomed, flowers of brass and gold, opening in harmony with thought, breath, and emotion. Time was not a tyrant here. It was a companion. The people he met smiled without hurry. They lived not in schedules, but in seasons. And yet, something stirred beneath the surface. The source had not given its full self to this new age. It had only opened one gate, one weave, one possibility. The heart of time still slept. Its silence hummed through the undercurrents like a question unanswered. The young man, who would later call himself Eli, began to feel drawn eastward, to a place spoken of only in old fragments of song and broken calendar stones, the spiral city of Overin. Overin was a legend among ruins, a place whispered by sandstorms and dreamwalkers. It was said to hold the last mirror, a relic built not to reflect faces, but futures. If any part of the old design still existed, the tyranny of the original symmetry, it would be hiding there. Eli followed the pulses in his watch. Each tick led him farther from towns and deeper into forgotten lands. Trees twisted into spirals. Water fell upward. Time was loosening like thread from a spool. Then one morning he found it. Overin did not rise above the ground. It sank below it. From the outside, it looked like a spiral crater of stone and glass, its entrance a single arch etched with 10 million names, each a whisper of a soul lost in the last reset. Eli stepped inside. The descent was quiet. No wind. No echoes. At the bottom, he found a door made of light. He knocked. It opened. Beyond it was not a room, nor a chamber, but a moment, preserved, perfect, eternal. The mirror stood alone at the center. Its frame was a ring of living vines made from antique clock springs. Its surface was silver-black, like still mercury under moonlight. Eli approached. His reflection did not mimic him. It looked older, wiser, wounded, and the reflection spoke. "You carry the watch." Eli nodded. "You are the heir, then. Chosen by absence, not blood. Chosen by time." Eli asked. "No," said the mirror. "Chosen by what time could no longer hold." Eli touched the surface. It rippled. He saw glimpses of other lives, lives he could have lived. One where he became a sculptor who carved minutes into marble. One where he was a soldier who fought in the War of Lost Seasons. One where he died as a child under a collapsed clock tower. "I don't understand," he whispered. "You were never meant to," the mirror said. "But you must choose." "What choice?" "The final piece of the loom is hidden inside the mirror. Vane left it here so that only one without ambition could find it." Eli blinked. "But I don't want anything." "Exactly," said the voice. "That is why time has waited for you." A hum began in the air, gentle, magnetic, ancient. The mirror melted, revealing a chamber inside itself. And there it was, the last gear. It was small, plain, made of petrified wood and starlight. Carved on its rim was a phrase in an extinct tongue. "To end is to begin without memory." Eli picked it up. His heart stopped. The world folded inward. He awoke in a tower, alone. At first, he remembered nothing. But the pocket watch ticked again, louder than ever. With every breath, his memories returned, fragmented, like puzzle pieces soaked in water. A voice called from above, not words, but presence. He climbed the winding stairs. As he neared the top, the air shimmered. Time felt thick, slow, reluctant. At the summit, there sat an old man in a chair of crystallized gears. His eyes were closed, his body translucent. Eli knew him before he was introduced. "Mr. Vane." The old man's eyes opened. They were empty and infinite. "Ah, the weaver walks. You left the last gear behind," Eli said. "Of course. I could not complete the loom. It was never mine to finish." "Then why did you start it?" Vane smiled. "Because time was cruel, and cruelty must be undone, even if the doing costs you your name." They sat in silence for a long moment. Then Vane spoke again. "The gear you found is not a cog. It is a decision." "I don't understand." "You will," Vane said. "Soon." He stood, slowly. "This tower is the axis mundi, the needle of time's compass. Whatever you place in its heart becomes law. Eli's hand clenched around the gear. What happens if I install it? Everything changes, Vane said. Again. And if I don't, then time resumes its current path. The new freedom you saw, it will persist, but slowly order will rot. Without boundaries, people will forget purpose. Time will become dream, then fog, then nothing. Eli stared at the core of the tower. Empty. Waiting. I don't want to be a god. You won't be. Just a gardener. Eli walked to the heart. The gear pulsed in his hand. He raised it, then paused. Will I remember? Vane smiled. Only the part that matters. Eli took a deep breath and pressed the gear into place. The tower sang. There was no explosion, no flash, no fanfare, just a deep silence. And then a voice, not from the tower, not from Vane, not even from Eli, but from everywhere. It said simply, "Let it grow." And so it did. Time did not rewind. It did not repeat. It blossomed. Clocks across the realms began ticking again, but now each beat matched not universal command, but personal rhythm. Everyone heard their own time, felt their own pace. Some aged slower, some healed faster. Moments stretched or shortened based on meaning, not measurement. The source was no longer hidden. It had become soil. The loom was no longer a machine. It was a garden. And in that garden, time was not kept. It was tended. As for Eli, he walked away from the tower with no memory of clocks, of mirrors, of gears or gods. He became a teacher in a village by the river, where the water sometimes flowed backwards when children laughed. He grew old very slowly. He married someone whose laughter made the sun hesitate before setting. He died once, and then woke up again, because his time had not finished listening. He never found the watch again, but sometimes, when he placed his hand on the earth, he felt it tick. Mr. Vane was never seen again. But sometimes, when a child took apart their first clock and asked, "Why does time tick like this?" a breeze would whisper through the window, and a gear no one remembered owning would roll softly to their feet. And somewhere, just behind the horizon, the source pulsed, not as a question now, but as a promise. Not all things must be wound. Some are meant to grow. Asterisk, asterisk. The clockmaker had kept time, but the weaver had set it free. Asterisk, asterisk. And time, finally, was home.